Thanks for listening to the podcast. We've got a ton of great content that covers the full journey of deploying a branded employee app. Go to staffbase.com, click on resources, and select Employee App Guide. That's it. Best wishes and back to the show. Hello and welcome. Today we are very excited to be joined by a group of HR industry leaders. Collectively, they have decades of experience uncovering and solving the challenges that large enterprises face regarding corporate culture, finding new talent, and keeping their all-stars. Before we begin, I'd love to do just a quick round of introductions and also just personally thank you for joining in on this virtual roundtable. I think having the HR perspective of what this thing called employee engagement really is going to be very engaging, very exciting, and I look forward to it. To start it off, Wesley, would you please introduce yourself?
You bet. Hello, everybody. I'm Wesley Vestal. I'm the VP of HR for the Western Hemisphere for Weatherford. I've been here about a year and about 25 years of experience.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us, Wesley. Jeffrey, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, happy to. In 2013, I joined Sasol. It's a petrochemical company based in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I'm located at our North American headquarters in Houston, Texas. And just a little bit of context, I joined the company 6 years ago as the head of people and organization effectiveness, just as we were finalizing the plans and engineering designs for a mega project chemical plant expansion in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And happy to say we are moving from design into commissioning and startup for 7 units that came with a total capital cost of $13 billion.
Wow. Jeffrey, thank you very much for sharing and thank you for joining. Fred, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Fred Stallwitz. I'm an author and international speaker. I focus on issues in the workplace that help shape culture, business, safe, productive, and sustainably profitable operations. I've worked in aerospace, oil and gas, developed technical training programs in both arenas.
Wonderful. Fred, thank you very much for joining us. Nick, if you could please introduce yourself.
Good morning. I'm Nick Tran. I'm head of global military and veteran programs at Schlumberger. Been with the company 5 years. Started the focus on hiring veterans about 5 years ago, and it was an HR initiative. But we quickly realized that there's a lot more to do than just recruiting veterans and getting into the veteran community, building our brand, building our name by helping focus on issues that are important to the veteran community. And by doing so, we made ourselves the employer of choice for veterans. In 2016, 17, and 18, we won the Military Friendly Employer Award by Victoria Media, and we're on schedule to get it for 2020 as well. So I'm here to contribute what I can, share about best practice and learn from you all.
Nick, thank you very much for joining, and further, thank you very much for your contribution. I think earlier when we were just starting to just talk offline, it was certainly mentioned how much admiration there is for you and your work and what you've done. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So to get this conversation started off regarding the HR perspective of employee engagement, there is a very familiar challenge, which is employee engagement itself. It's not uncommon that employees would prefer not to hear from HR and would actually instead prefer to hear directly from their leaders. And Nick, I thought it would be great to start off with you, if you could touch on your experiences with this particular topic.
Well, I've never really had that issue. You know, being in HR, I spent 18 years in HR on the recruiting side. So I was on the side of HR that added people. Didn't really have to. Luckily, it was not part of the side of HR that had to let people go. But the challenges that we had with recruiting, of course, in our industry, there's a cyclic upturn and downturn, and we've been in the downturn for a long time. The struggles that we had are when we're ramping up to go, getting ready to hire people, and we made some offers, and then we had to rescind them because of the downturn. That was a tough time to be in, tough conversation to have, and try to keep those candidates still having a good candidate experience, even though they were rejected at the end, and trying to help them find other opportunities in partner organizations.
Very interesting. Would anybody else like to touch on that? Perhaps Wesley.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because if engagement is an HR issue, you've lost the battle before you've started, right? I think the way you framed the question was so critical is our leaders, and in fact, one of the questions we'll talk about in a little bit is around culture is really what drives engagement. And, I think there's lots leaders can do. HR can certainly help provide tools to leaders, and I think that's the key piece. We use a couple here at Weatherford and some other organizations, skip level meetings, where we try to get leaders to skip a level down and actually talk and engage more with the individuals that work for the people that work for them, as well as things like stay interviews. Nick just highlighted the recruiting process. We do a lot of interviewing for employees, prospective employees, but throughout their life cycle as employees, we sometimes forget to interview them on why they'd stay with us and what's the value proposition that they perceive or don't in that particular case. So there's a lot of tools HR can provide, but at the end of the day, leaders have to live that because that's who they interact with on a day-to-day basis. Last tool that we've used with some success is actually getting people to help engage other people and put together small engagement teams at different locations and say, why don't you plan 4 events, one that's focused on volunteering, one that's focused on family, one that's focused on fun, and then something else interesting, and have the people actually own those personal connections that can help people feel a little bit more aligned with and personally connected to the work that they do.
Excellent. Fred or Jeff, would you like to touch on this?
Sure, this is Jeff, and I normally play the contrarian role, but in this case, I will absolutely agree with Nick and Wes. Like most energy companies and companies in general, we've been wrestling with diversity and inclusion. And we finally gained traction this year when one of our executive committee members said, this is not an HR initiative, this is a business imperative. And once our people feel included, then we will be a force to reckon with, and it will be very hard to compete against us. So when that leader, in this case was our CFO, was basically reinforcing that HR plays a role as a coach and an advisor behind the curtain, and that it is largely business issues to deal with culture, and in this case we were focusing on inclusion, then we started to gain traction and people began to believe again in the organization, and we made it much easier for employer branding so that people wanted to join the organization. And so the first half day of new hire orientation is led largely by vice and presidents rather than the HR community. So I'm agreeing with the premise that we play an active role, but it's behind the scenes rather than in front of the curtain.
Fred, it sounded like you also wanted to contribute.
Yeah, and employee engagement is a really challenging factor or concept to pin down because it's different for everyone. If you ask a group of employees, what do you like about working here? What do you don't like about working here? If they answer more energetically what they like about working there, then there's an engagement factor going on there. I would tend to think of engagement, the important elements are what are on either side of the engagement. And that is, on one side is what's the workplace experience, because that tends to drive whether somebody likes working there or not working there. If they have a good experience, then they like working there. And then the results of being engaged, of our processes, are people engaging in safe behaviors, in productive processes? Is work getting done effectively and efficiently? Are communication channels working? So rather than focus on the employee engagement itself, I would say focus on the things on either side of it, the workplace environment and the experience that employees are provided and the results of their labor.
Interesting. It sounds like if I was to summarize all of the responses, it always comes back to what sounds like the folks that you're serving, quite frankly. It sounds like the focus on how do we enrich the experience for the people specifically. And so with that, finding and attracting talented people is not something that is very easy to do. I know that some of you have proposed in the past some unique and competitive solutions of finding the ideal talent. And I thought, Wesley, if you'd like to start to share your thoughts on some of these struggles, and then also maybe some solutions that really do seem to stick.
Yeah, I'll certainly try to tee it up, and I think others on the call have some great examples to share as well. So, really for me, it's kind of 4 or 5 key things I think around attracting talent, and honestly, a lot of these won't necessarily be quote unquote unique. I think it's in some cases blocking and tackling, but as we've all discovered, it's really hard to do the blocking and tackling well. To start out, I think as a business, you've got to have a clear sense of what the employee value proposition is, which I think Fred just mentioned, that really answers that purpose question. Why are we here as a business, and why would you ever want to join us? And having that clear sense of the value proposition is really critical. And then not just for attracting, but also for that retain and engage piece. Second piece then is, as you're going through this, is having with recruiting with your recruiters, that ability to answer the old WIFM, the what's in it for me, obviously for the employee. If you've got a clear value proposition, you've then got to be able to articulate that, what's in it for the individual and what's in it for the company to actually use that individual's talents in a new and unique way. Third is, I think, really staying ahead on sourcing and talent pooling. And I think, Nick alluded to it. It's one of the challenges that we've got in oil and gas is that by the time you ramp up your recruiting, you're in a down cycle typically. And one of the things that tends to happen is you get a bit knee-jerk and you turn off the taps totally, which makes it really, really difficult to ramp back up then when you need to. So talent sourcing and talent pooling and keeping those relationships warm. I think Nick referenced that even people that you're having to let down, make sure they have a great candidate experience. And I personally, early in my career, interviewed with one of the big 4 consulting firms, didn't get the job, and still to this day think it was the best recruiting experience I ever went through, because of the way they treated me and the way that the way that they stretched me. Fourth piece then is we've got to meet candidates where they are. And I think that's a bigger and bigger challenge now with all of the avenues of social media, the different kinds of technology, the applicant tracking systems. We've got, as HR, a limited budget, as a business, limited capability in terms of platforms we can engage in compared to the consumer world, and so sometimes we lag behind because we've got these monolithic or archaic systems internally, and we all know people use their phones for just about everything in apps. And then the last piece is related to that, and that's staying relevant to what appeals to the different generations or types of employees that you're trying to bring in. I think for oilfield services specifically, we've got a large field population that are doing difficult labor in hard locations, all the way up to C-suites that make millions of dollars. We've got the Gen Zs coming into the generation pool, and we've still got some post-World War II and baby boomers. How are we appealing to those different audiences? Do we have the flexibility in our attractive tools to actually appeal to those individuals? What we read about a lot for Gen Z and millennials is how purpose-driven they are. So have we articulated a purpose versus for those in perhaps Gen X or baby boomers who really want a long and steady career? That's something that we have to appeal to. And the last thing I heard at an SP panel a few months ago was that relates to this is, with the large college debt burden that we're seeing with new employees coming into the workplace are our benefits packages, paying attention to those kinds of things. One company offered up that they actually give their new employees an option. We'll either match your 401k at X% or we'll divert that money that we were going to match to your college debt loan burden. So being flexible and I think adaptive to the situation is also critical. So those are 4 or 5 things I think really help with becoming an attractor of talent that can compete in the workplace.
Excellent. That was extremely insightful. Thank you very much for putting it together in that frame. Just to go down the list here, Jeffrey, would you like to touch on anything that maybe Wesley mentioned or didn't mention?
So what you said that was interesting is about dealing with college debt. Our company is based in South Africa, and they have a program called Bursary, where they basically go into the high school, find young, raw talent, and pay for their college education, and then we become by design their first employer. And I'm not sure that will spread outside of that continent, but it is certainly working well for us in Mozambique and South Africa and other places in that southern tip where we operate. So it's good to see that Weatherford is addressing that in North America.
Excellent. That's quite a venture, I could imagine, being able to offer something of that nature. Fred, do you have anything you'd like to touch on?
The package that Wesley addressed is pretty comprehensive and full spectrum, and I would extend that to say that what the employee base within an organization, if you're attracting what the employee base within that organization experiences, they're going to communicate through social circles out to the talent pool that you're trying to attract. So if your message is off base from what the experience is, if there's a gap between the aspirational and the functional culture that employees experience, then your message is going to differ than the message from the internal employees through social media, and that's going to create challenges for you.
Excellent. And then lastly, Nick, is there any thoughts you wanted to contribute towards this?
Yeah, so it was mentioned about college debt. So, with what I do with focusing on recruiting veterans, we know there's a good amount of veterans out there that are not going to go to college because they don't want to incur college debt. They've got GI Bill, and some of them just not going to go to college. So what we've done, especially in the Permian Basin, because the fight for talent is so fierce there, that we had to create some sort of competitive advantage to allow those veterans that we know that are not going to go to college to somehow use their GI Bill benefits to get into career. So what we've done is we've gotten the National Apprenticeship Program approved by the Department of Labor. And what that allows a veteran to do that has college bill benefits is to get hired by us. We put them in what we call a training position, and it's lumped under an apprenticeship program, and it allows the veteran to use their GI Bill to get a monthly stipend for being in that role. It's on-the-job training. They're getting paid the same salary that we would pay somebody that's not a veteran, but then they're getting an extra $1,900 a month for up to 2 years by the government. And this allows them to make up that money as they're building up their career, but it also is a huge retention bonus for us, and it's also a huge recruiting tool for us. And it's a competitive advantage when we're losing. In the past, we have lost people to our competitors for an extra hour, an extra $1 an hour or $2 an hour, and then they would go to our competitors. We'll raise our rates, and they come back to us, and it's a vicious cycle where we stop that with this apprenticeship program.
Fascinating. Yeah, it's in sticking with looking for talent. Something that was mentioned a couple of times, and earlier in the first question as well, was corporate culture and how important, how large of a factor it is when people are looking for their next workplace. And I thought I'd start with Jeffrey in terms of, from your experience, how much of a role does culture play in keeping people at their workplace and also in turn reducing churn?
I can't emphasize enough that culture is number one. So I'll go back to my experience over the past 6 years. The good news is that we're building 7 units. The bad news is no energy company builds more than 1 or possibly 2 units at the same time. So for the past 6 years, I've had the chance to really rethink everything about employer branding, recruiting, the changing demographics of our workforce, and most importantly, our culture. So when we were really doing the heavy lifting on the engineering design in 2013 and 14, what we said and predicted is by 2020, or basically now, 3 things would happen. That our employee age, the average would drop from 47, which are Gen Xers, to 35 millennials. We did, in fact, have that 12-year drop in employee age. Second thing we predicted is that years of experience would drop from 15, is where we were in 2013, to less than 5. And right now we're at 4.6 years of experience. So you can just see how that is going to impact our long-term success as well as the startup of the 7 units. And then the third thing that we predicted is that our legacy population would go from 100% to under 20. Right now, if you look at our North American workforce, the people that were around 6 years ago are only 17% of the population. So again, that gave us a chance to rethink how we do everything. And where we started with is our culture. So in the past, we can honestly say that most new employees said, 6 to 9 months, I'll determine if I really want to stay with the company. Now the situation is, if you haven't convinced me or impressed me by lunchtime on the first day, I'm probably not going to stick around. Second thing that we've noticed is that people in the good old days wanted to stay with a company for a significant period of time, as long as they were paid well and they could see slow and steady professional growth. What do our people say now? They say they are here because they want meaningful experiences. And that's something that Fred kept saying. They want to be mentored. They want a company and a mission that they can believe in. And as Nick and Wesley said, it's a little difficult in our industry because not all the energy companies produce gasoline. And we're in the chemical side, or the downstream part of the energy value chain. And so we sell our products to other chemical companies. So we don't really touch the customer directly. The other things that our new employees want is that they want to be able to contribute. They want learning to be always on. They want to see the company values lived out every day. They want continuous feedback and recognition. And they want the coolest tools to be able to perform their job. The other thing is that when you look at the Great Place to Work competition, I think they took a left turn somewhere, because they usually highlight a handful of things or perks that differentiate a small handful of employers from the rest of the pack. But in our experience, again, over this wonderful learning lab over the past 6 years, I believe there are 3 components that lead to whether or not people will be attracted to your company and how long they will stay. And we've alluded to the fact that they're kind of squishy. So the first one is the emotional connection people have with their organization, which is largely their supervisor. Number 2, the local culture. And number 3, how inclusive you make insiders and outsiders feel. I'll go back to them real briefly. So on the emotional connection you build with people, that usually comes from your immediate supervisor, and not so much the top executives of the company. Although a lot of employee engagement methodology is based on questions about the executive leadership team and how much faith you have in them and the strategy they set. But the reality is very few employees in an organization. So we have about 33,000. How many of them ever really engage with the leadership or the top of the house? So I really believe that emotional connection with your immediate supervisor is key. Second is the local culture. And I don't know how to describe it much better than it's really the personality and the style of how you do things. So that would include examples like how you treat people who work remotely, what is recognized, what is not, the stories that you tell. And again, if you're not telling stories in the first 2 hours of the employee's new hire orientation on day one, you're losing them. Do you assume people are always working with the best interests of the company at heart? What is the organization's attitude towards training? How you handle layoffs? Nick's touched on this. How you handle the slowdowns in the business. So I really think it's that local culture. And to answer the question that everybody's been wrestling with, is there a single culture in an organization? Well, if you have more than 5 employees in more than one location, I think the chances are not. And then the third thing we've learned about how to make employees sticky to the company is how inclusive you make insiders and outsiders feel. Maybe the best way of explaining what I'm thinking about there is how much of a mask do people have to put on as they're heading to work? To what extent can they be their true selves, or do they have to take on that corporate persona? And my belief is that it takes so much energy to change from me, who I am, to that corporate image of who I need to be, that I have a lot less energy to really give to the company. So the more that you are like yourself at work, you can dedicate towards thinking about customers, whether they're internal or external to the organization. And I'll go back to an earlier company I worked for. That was Landmark Graphics. They made software, very complicated, sophisticated software for understanding the reservoirs underneath the ground. And what was cool from them is, as an example, the communications didn't come from a machine. They came from an employee with a personality. And her personality came through in the notes. And so just the tone of them had kind of a little playful attitude towards employees rather than from the machine. And so I think that the sooner people can become more like themselves, the more energy they have to focus on their jobs and beating the competition. And again, I believe you have the first 4 hours between 8 a.m. and noon to convince people that they should stay. And if not, I think you've really lost the game. So the summary to your question is that culture is absolutely everything, and that the perks that are often cited in best places to work, I think, are secondary at best. So I'll hand the question back to you.
Yeah, that was great. In particular, I loved hearing the specific example about that person at the software company where her personality was echoed throughout her communications plan, which I thought was really interesting, and talked about relevance and being present and human in yourself, not your corporate self, etc. Fred, would you like to start the discussion on this?
What Jeff mentioned that one of those first items, the emotional connection, and that the employee has with the supervisor. It's also emotional connection the employee has with coworkers. That, I think, is a really good example to look at, because in all of this discussion of employee engagement are human factors, and each individual experiences different things and similar things in different ways. That people like to listen to rock music, some people like opera, some people are turned off by rock music, some people are turned off by opera. You can't across the board say there's one type of situation that you can create that's going to make every employee happy. So what Jeff was saying, at the management level, you got small enough groups that if the managers are attuned to that connection with the employees, that individual can refine how they interface and the experience that they help create for that employee to engage them in the process and to reward them for having engaged in the process. So companies and organizations that look at human factors as kind of an intangible, but deal with all of the things in the workplace that feed into that, that's where they can start looking at metrics and looking at patterns and say, well, our system is down an abnormally amount.
Oh, Fred, it sounds like you might have dropped out.
I think we lost Fred.
Yep. Looks like. All right. Well, then I'm going to move on to Nick while Fred is working on his connection. Nick, did you have any thoughts on this?
We've got a lot of activities on getting or keeping employees engaged. I mean, we've got so many different employee resource groups focusing on whatever it is issues that are important to the employee. We kind of let them choose. And like, for example, we've got Earth Day, where, you know, even though we're oil and gas, we are very, very big on trying to reduce our carbon footprint. So we have Earth Day where we go out and have opportunities where Schlumberger sponsors employees to go out and plant trees and to go out to do community projects. There's, you know, with the veterans that I handled, we do a lot of focusing within the veteran community, helping raise money for veterans who are homeless, or do a house makeover for veterans. So, I mean, there's a lot of opportunities that we try to provide for our employees to do stuff to give back. But as far as keeping employees engaged, it's a very big thing for us. We've got a thing called an Engage to Excel. Each business group, each team has like sessions where we'll spend a week to get to know other members of the team. We'll take personality tests to find out where we rank in certain quadrants, to help understand each other, help how to interact better with each other. So there's constant development, constant training in just making us understand each other better, developing a stronger emotional intelligence for everybody in the company, and just it's more of a bonding experience in many ways, with training and development, and also opportunities to give back to the community.
Interesting. Wesley,
Jeff, at Sasol, if I may, Jason.
Yeah, please.
For a couple of decades, Schlumberger was well known in the oil field services industry as a leader. And having worked with Nick and seeing him in action for a number of years at HR conferences in and around Houston, I really want to acknowledge the contribution he has made, not only to Schlumberger, but really employment of veterans and making them feel included. Because oftentimes, unfortunately, there's such a hard translation moving from the armed services into industry. And Nick in particular has figured that out and has made really Schlumberger an even stronger organization, not only because of the work that they do, but the way they treat veterans. And I just want to make sure that's noted.
Wow, so thank you for your kind words. I think the biggest thing that I'm trying to do is trying to change the narrative for veterans, that veterans, we're not a bunch of people who are broken, that constantly need help, that veterans are the type of people that will help your organization. I know there's some negative aspects on portrayals of veterans through media, through movies, but the majority of us really want to serve. You know, we wanted to serve when we serve in the military, but you know, when we get out, we want to serve our communities. We want to reintegrate, and we don't want people to think we're so different. So some of the things that I do with engaging with the veteran community is also to teach the veteran community and veterans that you're worth a lot more. Don't be limited by what your title was or what your rank was, and you have opportunity to continue to serve by serving your communities, and then getting into those companies and helping that company grow and be competitive. And that's what being a veteran is about. So thanks for the kind words. And I just, I do what I do because I love it. I feel like I'm contributing to our company, to our veterans, and also to our country.
That's wonderful. Sorry, please go right ahead. Go right ahead, Fred.
Yeah, and I recently wrote a book, Boots in the Office, which guides employees or veterans in transition to civilian jobs. And in the people I worked with in putting that together, I would say that veterans have a lot to be proud of, because they tend to bring into a workplace a structure and an order and a mission-oriented perspective that a lot of workplaces that are, if I can use the word, are dysfunctional, that the challenge is for the veterans to adapt to a certain amount of dysfunction that they're not used to. And so I would kind of give them a lot of credit for being a positive addition to many workplaces.
Let's expand on this if it's all right with everyone. This is an extremely interesting topic, and I think that it sounds like everyone is interested in extending this a little bit further. One thing that comes to mind in this conversation for me, and I'll start with I'll start specifically with you, Nick, to answer this, just to kick it off. But I'd love to understand. I know there are organizations that very specifically mention and say we welcome and want veterans. There are also organizations that internally very much would love to have veterans be part of their organization, to the point that that Fred just made regarding the being able to accommodate very different types of work environments. What is your advice to organizations that may not be specifically advocating that they are looking for veterans but are eagerly interested? Do you have any thoughts or feedback on that?
I do. I actually have advice for organizations, but also veterans. So I'll start with organizations. I think a lot of organizations have the when they start building a veteran program, they try to. It seems like they all go in the same pattern. They try to create some sort of MOS analyzers. For those of you that don't know, MOS is military occupational, especially what you did in the military. And they try to have some sort of analyzer on their website where a veteran can come in, put what they did in the military, what their job was, what their rank was, and then it shoots out a bunch of jobs within your organization to what these veterans will qualify for. The problem with that is most veterans in companies aren't doing what they did in the military. And I went and tried out a couple of these MOS analyzers from different organizations. I would try out one for Home Depot, and I put my information in, what my military background, my rank was, and what shot out was I was qualified to be a cashier or a stock person. Nothing wrong with that, but I'm capable with a little bit more. So those things are very limiting to a veteran. And then I kind of equate that to, if you go back to at the end of World War II, where women had been working in the factories while the men were out and fighting, and then all these companies saw how women were performing in the factories and thought, hey, this is great. Women are awesome employees. Let's create a hiring initiative to hire women. But yeah, let's see what they did at the home and see how that can translate to what we do here. So yeah, women were at home cooking, they're home cleaning, so maybe they can work in our cafeterias, or they can work as housekeepers for our companies. That's pretty offensive if you bring that to today. But that's what we're doing to veterans. We're kind of looking at what they did in the military and how that can translate to possibly a role in our job, in our company. Instead of looking at that veteran as somebody who brings in strong work ethic and core values, who's willing to get there early, willing to stay late, willing to get the job done no matter what, who can think on his or her feet, and has the experience, global experience of working with other people from other countries. When we were in Afghanistan, we were in Iraq, whatever, we have a culture awareness. We have culture awareness classes that we're constantly taking to understand how to work with these foreign allies and foreign people and to get the job done. So if you look at that person as those are the skill sets that they bring to your organization. And as far as the technical aspects, we're an engineering company. We can teach them every bit of the technical piece of that job, but we can't teach that person to bring their work ethic and core values. So when you're building a program for veterans, think of that. Try not to figure out what they did in the military, but more of who that person is and how they can fit in your team, what they can accomplish in your team. Don't worry about the technical aspects too much. I think people tend to focus on that instead of thinking of focusing on somebody who's very trainable, who's willing, who's eager, and who has that drive that you're looking for that maybe you're not getting from other candidates. So that's my advice for companies looking to hire veterans.
You mentioned that you also wanted to talk a little bit about some advice to veterans themselves, and I would welcome you to use the floor for that.
So, when a company says they're military friendly and they're looking to hire veterans, there are a very small but vocal group of veterans who it's kind of their fault, kind of not their fault. It's kind of society's fault for calling every veteran a hero for doing his or her job. So you kind of have this complex like, hey, they owe us something. Now, I will say that the majority of veterans don't feel this way, but some do. Some see companies who say they're military friendly, they're expecting to get hired just because they're a veteran. So me as a veteran who has I spent 13 years in the military, so I'm a mid-level manager, and I have no problems telling a veteran you need to square yourself away. It's just like when we were in the military and there are elite units that we wanted to get into, like Rangers or Special Forces or other cool schools, there are certain criteria that we still had to meet. Well, in the military, we call that meeting the standard. You have to meet the standard to whatever you do. But when you want to get into these elite units, not only do you have to meet the standards, you have to exceed the standards. So I try to relay that to veterans who are trying to get into tier 1 organizations, Fortune 500 organizations, just the big players within the industries, is that, first of all, these are top organizations. It's going to be hard to get in. You're going to have to do your homework. You're going to need, when you come up to the interview or the job booth or career fair, you need to know what that company does, who their customers are, what jobs they're hiring for, what those requirements are, those jobs. So I've had in the past veterans come up to me on the job fair and say, what do you do? And they're asking me, like, what does this company do? And then they say, I'm a veteran, what do you have for me? And my answer is, I don't have anything for you. You have to figure out what it is that we're hiring for, what we're looking for. That's not the type of veteran we want to hire. I mean, the veterans we want to hire are the ones that take the initiative to do their homework. And it's just like any good soldier did the reconnaissance before they went to operate on that mission. And those are the type of people that we're looking for. And I'm trying to relay that to a lot of veterans, like, put away the veteran card. Remember that you are a veteran and why you're a veteran, what made you a veteran, and use that and apply those skills you learned in the military into the civilian as you're trying to transition. So it comes from both ends from me, and also not just from me, but all the veterans that are in our organization. We try to help coach, mentor, give tough love to other veterans as they're trying to transition. So it's a dual end, from outside, from inside looking out to veterans, but also looking into our organization and educating our hiring managers on what the value that veterans bring to our organization and how to really what to look for and not worry so much about some of the other things that not to look for. Did that make sense? I know I rambled on a little bit.
No, that made perfect sense. I appreciate everything that you're talking about here. I think this is extremely valuable and very interesting. Wesley, you haven't had a chance to talk for a little while, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to either answer, talk about anything that Nick has just brought up, or even to go back towards the original last question we had, which was just about just looking for talent in corporate culture itself.
Yeah, well, honestly, and I'm not just saying it, I think Jeffrey sort of gave a 5-minute master class on culture. Not a ton to add there, but there's a great quote by Drucker, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast every morning. That I think is really relevant for both topics, both corporate culture as well as what Nick and others were chatting about in terms of veterans, because it really is that that sense of culture, whether it's veteran friendly, it's LGBTQ friendly, female friendly, et cetera, is all about making sure that the way people think about and do things in your organization are aligned with the purpose and mission of that organization, and that people feel included in that mission. So I love the discussion. I don't have a ton more to offer there. I think previous organization I worked with was KBR, the old Kellogg Brown and Root, has a large government services focus, and they actually had a fantastic program with Fort Polk to help transitioning veterans come out, very similar to what Nick talked about. And they recognized very early that the skills that they brought didn't necessarily need to be the technical. And so they put together about an 8-week program to teach them how to be pipe fitters, right? And they realized, hey, this is a great workforce with all these native skills Nick talked about, who can bring this culture of professionalism, get the job done, willing to work where the work is, and we can teach them how to be pipe fitters or whatever the task XYZ may be. And I think that really contributed to the culture of friendliness, openness, stick-to-itiveness, get it done kind of attitude. So I really think that culture piece cannot be underemphasized. And the last thing I'll mention, Duke's Fuquay School of Business came out with a survey, a number of heads of CFOs and CEOs of organizations. And it's quite interesting. This was late 2015. About over 50% of the CEOs said the number one thing on their list that they felt drove business results was culture. And that was ranked ahead of things like having a strategy, or having a good operation plan, or having good officers of your company. They thought it was that important. So over half of CEOs and CFOs would actually say culture is more important than just about anything else we do. And on the flip side, about I think 10 or 15% of them said that they felt their culture was where it needed to be. So clearly we all have a lot of work to do.
Excellent. Thank you for that. In an effort to conserve time, I do want to move on to the next question, which does shift gears a little bit in terms of just burnout and being overwhelmed. And so going from the hiring perspective, but then now shifting it more towards the people itself. And I know, Nick, you have to step out. I think we all thank you for your contribution to today. Thank you so much for your insight. And I believe, and I'll make sure that in the show notes that the key points that you talk for organizations looking to hire veterans, organizations, folks that are veterans that are looking to join organizations can seek your advice for that. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. You guys all have my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me at any time. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you. You too. So with the talking about that, the shifting gears to being burnt out, overwhelmed, et cetera, from just the demand of the workplace, the fear of just being fired. Fred, what opportunities do you see in preventing or reducing stress reaching an unhealthy level?
Well, that phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast, that's kind of old. The new one is stress devours culture. Stress is the key factor that if management is only paying attention to one element of what's going on in the workplace, you want to manage stress, because that's going to produce the most positive results in so many areas. The two key areas that focus that stress impacts, one is safe operations, and the other is productivity. If you think of like 2 cups of coffee, they're filled to the brim. An operation is operating at the full focus of safety and at the full focus of productivity. You start entering stress into that, stress starts drinking out of that cup and starts reducing the excellence in those 2 areas that an organization may have had or previously may have operated at. Stress creates distractions or allows distractions to enter into operations, and therefore provides a gap for safety incidents to start peppering the operation. It also distracts from productivity, so people have to spend a certain amount of time focusing on a distraction. The distraction may be some conflict they have with their management, some conflict with a coworker, some problem accessing resources, some issue with is this procedure correct or not correct? Is it the best practice or not? Any kind of issue that enters into the workplace that causes an individual a problem in being successful potentially adds stress and minimizes safe and productive operations.
I wanted to hand it over to Jeffrey if you had any thoughts.
Sure, we can talk about stress in spades due to the very lengthy mega project that we are going through. So the one definite piece that I would add to Fred's comments is the impact on safety. Since really the fourth quarter of 2012, we've been working on this project, and as I mentioned, 2 of the units are up and running and 5 more to go. And so keeping people focused on being safe has been a priority. So one of the things we've been really doing 2 things. The first one is focus groups, and the second thing is rethinking our HR policies. In terms of focus groups, we've been working with many cross-sectional groups of employees to really understand what in particular about the mega project is stressing them and dealing with that head on. Which leads into the second point, is the HR policies. And so what we've been doing is very carefully monitoring vacation usage. And in that case, it's definitely encouraging people to take their vacation. Another thing is monitoring the number of consecutive days worked and then putting a cap on that until all the units are at beneficial operations. Number 3, we've developed an excess hours worked pay solution to try to compensate for those people that, because of the nature of their work and the criticality to the units starting up, don't have a lot of choice or backups. And so we developed this excess hours pay solution that we know it's temporary and only gets you so far, but it does, we believe, help to alleviate some of the stress associated with working so many days in a row and so many hours in a row. And I will add that one of our competitive chemical companies in the Lake Charles, Southwest Louisiana area has done something that we think is really cool, is that when people go on vacation, if they do not log on to their company phone or their company laptop, they actually pay them extra money while they're on vacation. And so this can be an extra week or 2, which I think is even stretching my boundaries of comfort, which tend to be a little bit on the liberal side. So we picked up something from our competition that we're taking a look at. But as Fred mentioned, we are all having to deal with this. Working on a mega project just makes it even that much more critical. And then the energy patch, because what we do can kill people or impact the environment, it's even more important that we in HR keep an eye out for stress and address it head on.
Excellent. Wesley, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, not a ton more. I think, again, they've plumbed the depths pretty well here. I think, the only other thing I'd add is part of our job as leaders in the company is to really pay attention and really think and focus people on the work to get done and less on how they get it done and when they get it done. I mean, it kind of gets back to this sort of let's pay less attention to you've got to be in the office from 8 to 5 and you've got to do this, that, or the other and wear these clothes. It's really more about the work that you do and giving people a little bit more autonomy where possible. Obviously, if you're out describing what Jeffrey's doing and you're working on a mega project, you can't be overly flexible, but where you can focus on the work to be done, not necessarily how people get it done, just expect results and help support them that way. I think second thing is really, being servant leaders and paying attention to the needs of the people, to Jeffrey's point, monitoring vacation, overtime, days on, is really critical. And I think, as a society here in the U.S., we really look down on and frown upon almost vacation and taking time off versus some of our colleagues in Europe or other parts of the world. And literally having just come off of a 10-day vacation, it's incredible. I still have the glow 4 days later of the world is a big place, and this particular annoyance on that day isn't going to get me down. I'm sure that won't last much longer, but the power of stepping away and having that time off is really critical to combating stress. And even more importantly, it's, that's a bit of a Band-Aid or panacea. It's making sure that the work that people are doing, they have the right tools, they have the right training, they have the right support, so that as they're going through their day-to-day routine, they aren't feeling that extra stress of, I don't know how to do it, I can't do it because I don't have the tools, or I just don't have the support I need from my boss. So.
This is Jeff. I'd like to piggyback on, if I may, I'd like to piggyback on what I just heard Wesley say. So going back to 2005, 6, and 7, I worked for a beverage company based in Atlanta. You might know them. They have a red can. And the only time you saw the executives off executive row was Friday afternoon. And God love them, they were all the greatest generation, the one that preceded baby boomers. And their view of the workforce is to make sure their butts were in the seats on Friday afternoon. And unfortunately, that was often the only time you got to see them. And so that just spoke volumes about what they thought about the workforce. And again, to be fair, that's how they learned it from their parents and that were, wrapped up in World War II, et cetera. But that just doesn't work anymore, if it ever did. And so I think that's what we as business people, and with a focus on HR, really have to make sure is that we are the keepers of that part of our culture, and we need to make sure that top management is aware of that. And we do our greatest good, our biggest contribution is when we confront those little microaggressions and make sure that our culture is aligned with what we're trying to achieve. So I appreciate Wesley bringing those up.
Well, let's actually kind of flip that on its head and say, there's been a lot of discussion here, especially about leaders in particular, and the desire and the drive to be subservient leaders, as Wesley pointed out. What if, when the problem is actually within leadership, and how is that uncovered? What type of challenges are being faced when who needs to be, I guess, spoken to or worked with or identified is leadership? I'll start with Fred. How would you tackle such a problem?
I would simplify it. First, in terms of culture, there's a general misunderstanding of culture, the relationship between culture and workplace environment. Culture is a smattering of a lot of different factors, but the only one that you can see and the only one that you can manage is behavior. So if management focuses on culture in terms of this is a snapshot of the behavior, we like it or we don't like it. So if we don't like it, then how do we change it? And then the workplace environment is what the employee experiences. And there's a connection between the two. So if management doesn't like the direction or the behaviors that they see in the workplace or things that are happening in the workplace, their opportunity for changing the culture is by changing the environment that the employees experience. They change that environment, employees experience a different environment, they behave differently. As a result, the culture changes. It takes time to make that happen. One of the challenges for management then is if they're trying to drive a cultural change in a particular direction, they have to model those behaviors, because employees will see that, oh, they're telling us to behave this way, but they're behaving this other way, and this other way got them to where they were, so that's the path to success. So we're not going to listen to the things on the posters or on the website. We're going to listen to what we see management demonstrating to us through their behavior. So putting that kind of foundation, any issues within the organization in terms of good or bad management or good or bad employees ultimately track back to management. There are management issues one way or the other, because management has the most control over designing the conditions, shaping the conditions within the workplace. So regardless of whether it's this group over here is not performing the way we think it should be, well, then look at the conditions in the workplace that were created for that group and start modifying them to get a different behavior and model the behavior that you want to follow.
Excellent. Jeffrey, I'd love your thoughts on this.
As Fred mentioned, it begins and ends with leadership. And sometimes you need to put a bullet in the chamber and take somebody out. And then the even harder part is giving the employees that worked under that jerk a chance to behave differently. And so just taking somebody out, and I can think of a recent example of that I'm very familiar with, even taking somebody out often isn't by itself enough. You need to talk with the survivors and then tell stories about why that person was removed and what the new game plan is, and it's usually around living out your values. And what happens is companies tend to hang on far too long to technically brilliant jerks that have some deep understanding of the technology, but the way they treat their people and the local culture that they create is just not acceptable, but you tolerate it because they're so darn smart. And sometimes you just have to let them work for another company and then give people permission to behave the way they know is better, especially when an organization is under stress, and as we have been for at least 6 years with the building 7 units and getting them all set to start up. We're not seeing people at their finest. People are just tired and exhausted. So you have to talk about it a little bit more when situations are more stressful than usual. But definitely agree that it starts and ends with leadership.
Wesley, I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, in addition to what Jeff and Fred brought up, I think, as HR, part of our role is, again, putting in some tools to help us identify these areas and give us an opportunity to course correct. So, as Jeffrey mentioned, sort of the technical competencies, we have a lot of these technically brilliant people, especially in oil field services, oil and gas companies, and whether they're upstream, downstream, midstream, that maybe have a lot of great but they don't use what they know in a very productive way, right? And I think a lot of the tools that we put in place when we think about a lot of companies will have a technical competency list. They'll also have something like leadership or behavioral competencies as well. And to me, that's the difference between what you know and how you use what you know. And as we move into leadership roles, whether that's on a technical career path, as you get into sort of a staff engineer or a technical advisor, or maybe even a fellow in a sophisticated technology organization, or you're actually a people manager, it's how you use what you know that's so critical. And I think having things like an effective performance management process, and maybe it's not the old way of setting goals in the beginning of the year and doing a review at the end. But one thing we've done here and at my previous organization is implement something called quarter conversations, a quarter of an hour every quarter with every employee. And it's just focusing people in on a couple of key things. How you doing on your goals? Here's some feedback. How you doing on development? And here's something I'd like to recognize that's gone well. Forcing those more frequent conversations sort of outs those people, as Jeffrey sort of mentioned a minute ago, easier and more quickly, right? When those kinds of conversations aren't happening, or you see particular groups of people really falling by the wayside, underperformance, et cetera. I think those types of more regular check-ins can certainly help. The old classic case of GE under Jack Welch, right, where they sort of had a 4-box A, B, C, D players. The C players were providing good results, but weren't living the culture of the company. And those were individuals that they exited quickly as well. So I think those are a couple of things that really can help. And then, the last one is monitoring sort of retention and employee investigations and some of those, dirty statistics that we like to track and look for those sort of problem areas. It's looking in the rearview mirror, but at the end of the day, you've got to have a kind of a full suite of things to help identify where you need to either course correct or in some cases make a change. And, to that end, you never want this to be 100% punitive, but there are opportunities and times where, removing somebody or as Jeffrey kindly said, allowing them to work at another company sends a loud and clear message to the rest of the organization that this is not how we operate and this is not what we tolerate, even if they were delivering great business results. And that's the hardest leadership decision I think we see in most companies, is being willing to say this guy or gal is my top performer or one of the best in the company, and we're going to let them go because they do not deliver results the way that we want.
Interesting. A very fascinating approach, and I can't even fathom the challenges behind it. I have one more question for all of you, and I want to just start by saying it's been an absolute pleasure learning from you during this virtual roundtable. I like to end these discussions with something that's a little bit more relaxed and broad. So the final question that I wanted to ask each of you is, if you had one piece of advice to give an organization that taps on your shoulder and says, hey, give me some golden nugget or some question to help me improve my overall HR experience, what would it be? And I'll start with Fred.
I want to just thank you also. This has been one of the best discussions I've been involved in. And the nice part about it is at conferences, you're kind of short, you have just a short time frame. And this has been nice, kind of have more extended conversation with some folks that are extremely knowledgeable. The one element that I would suggest, and this is let people be heard. And Jeffrey mentioned that they're doing this in terms of the focus groups, but in a formal sense, create and maintain an effective communications and feedback channel. If people if people know they're heard, if their concerns, they know their concerns are being heard, and there's an effort to address them. Maybe it's not possible to fix everything, but people see that there's an effort in the right direction, then they'll go a long ways. There's to engage in the process as long as they think they're important in that, and the way to make them important is to listen to their voices. And actually a good way to address problems that an organization has is listen to the people that have the problems and are trying to tell you this is a problem and help them solve it.
Excellent. Next, I'll ask Jeffrey.
I'm not going to make any friends with this answer, but I think the dumbest job description title we have in the world is HR business partner. I don't see a finance business partner. I don't see an IT business partner. I don't see an operations business partner. I don't see a legal business partner. I think HR is doing a disservice to itself when we kind of beg with a cup on our hands and say, please allow us to be at the business table. it's pretty obvious through this conversation that Wesley in particular is a business person first and an HR advisor second. And so if we have to come up with silly, goofy titles to earn a seat at the table, we're not helping ourselves. But I will say that I think our goal in HR is to be trusted advisors who provide great advice. But we don't act as the cops, but we help advance the business people's thinking and that they ultimately make the decision. And we can point out the pros and cons of different ways of approaching any business problem, but it's ultimately theirs. We are servant leaders, as has been mentioned. We are the coaches on the sideline. We are not always in the game, but we need to earn trusted advisor status, and having a silly title as HRBP is not doing us any favor.
Wesley, I'd love to get your feedback on question and also on Jeffrey's thoughts.
Sure. No, that's fantastic. Look, I mean, I started my career out in consulting and sort of found my way into HR intentionally about a decade ago. And, I think there was probably a bit of an overreaction from the days of being the personnel department to wanting to squeeze into the business. And so I think, thanks to Ulrich and several other noted authors in the HR space, right? Business partner was a way to do that, and it's probably slammed the needle far on the right, and we need to come back to the middle. As Jeffrey said, the trusted advisor piece is key. Look, for me, the HR has two words in it: human and resources. And I think, to me, that's the advice I'd give other organizations, is to remember both of those words and how important they are. I think we've got, as HR, to keep humans first. At the end of the day, in most companies, you are as good or as bad as the people that you bring to the table every day to compete with your marketplace and deliver solutions to your customers. So if you don't take good care of the people, they're not going to take good care of you, right? It's kind of customer service 101 stuff. And I think in HR, we've got to make sure that we have that constantly in the minds of our leaders. And so, one of the just basic mantras I think that people can help to be more human is more coaching and more feedback are better than not. I think it helps with all the things that we talked about: culture, stress, engagement, is keeping humans front and center. More coaching, more feedback, be with your people. But just as important on the HR side, to address Jeffrey's point, is the resources piece. A business has limited resources to convert into whatever it is that they sell and take to the market to generate profitable returns, right, for their shareholders and for the stakeholders that are involved in their enterprise. And so we have got to understand how much of those resources, whether it's people or assets, we can bring to bear, and how do we take best care of those and do the most that we can with the least number of resources, while we keep the humans front and center. So driving efficient and effective processes with the best people should be our job every day. And again, I can't more strongly echo Jeffrey's point. We are all business people. I may focus on HR, legal may focus on the law, finance may understand the numbers differently than others. But we're all here to run a business. And so that's, to me, what HR is all about. It's human and it's resources.
Excellent. Again, I just wanted to thank you all and Nick, who is no longer on the call, for your time today. I think that this has been wildly entertaining, and I learned quite a bit about the industry from your perspectives, and I truly appreciate this and look forward to finding more folks out there that are going to really be able to absorb all of that was shared today. So thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Cool.
Great. Thanks for listening to the podcast. We've got a ton of great content that covers the full journey of deploying a branded employee app. Go to staffbase.com, click on resources, and select Employee App Guide. That's it. Best wishes, and back to the show. you.